I'm not. So now you're gonna help me explain the title. The title is this year. The title is Hanukkah a national holiday, a religious holiday, or a universal holiday? Who can explain the title? I mean, what I mean each one is. Not the conclusion of this year. How do you understand the title? Because in what way would you consider Hanukkah a national holiday?
It's the establishment. We won the war. It's an establishment of the new.
But that's every holiday. They try to kill us. Remember, we won the sea. You know that one.
Well, no, but it's the Menorah, right? When we finally had.
We were under foreign power, right? We were not sovereign. We were under foreign rule. And when we won the battle, we got rid of foreign rule. We got rid of the Greeks, and we are sovereign. What form of government? Doesn't make much difference, but we're sovereign.
Yep.
Do we have a king and a city? You can argue what it was, but for the first, in fact, if you look in the Rambam Hanukkah, that's what he says. He goes, "What's the big deal? Chazra Malchut Yisrael." After so many years, the first time in Beit Sheni that what came back? That Melucha came back. Melucha means Melucha. They know what that means. Sovereignty comes back, and therefore, that's a national. That's like Yom Ha'atzmaut kind of idea. Or Yom Yerushalayim. It's a national holiday. And it's what to celebrate. In fact, the original source for celebrating Hanukkah is in the Megillah called Megillah Ta'anit, which is not about fast days, it's about not fast days. It's almost like we have what days not to say Tachnun. So we have all these different days not to say Tachnun. So in the Second Temple period, there was a Megillah of national holidays, like Yom Yerushalayim, Yom Ha'atzmaut, like Gomer, things like that. Yeah. What was forbidden was fasting and eulogizing. And that's Megillah Ta'anit. Every month had a couple that had 1 or 2 days in it. It's a famous source. It's Tanaitic. Tanaitic. How to pronounce that word? It's Tanai in Hebrew. Now, all those holidays were annulled when all the national holidays are annulled. Guess when? When we lost our sovereignty, when the Second Temple was destroyed. We had that last surge, we had the big revolt and everything, it didn't work too good. And therefore, all those days are back, you can fast again, and you can except for 2 holidays. What were they? Hanukkah and Purim. That's famous Gemara, I have to prove it to you. So therefore, as a national holiday, the reason to celebrate national holiday was because of the Hasmonean victory, agreed? And the reason to stop celebrating would be temple being destroyed. That makes sense? But if I can celebrate national history, it's because we return to sovereignty, which means there's no logical reason to continue celebrating after the temple was destroyed. Unless it was so great, we just want to remember it like Yitzhak Mitzrayim kind of thing was a big event. No. In what way is it a religious holiday? What's like
rededication?
Chanuka Mizbeyach, okay, and like to this day, what element of Hanukkah is like the religious? There's someone who's more like a more like let me say dati, more orthodox kind, a more ultra-orthodox kind of person. What's the big deal? I mean, what's the main mitzvah they're being makbid on?
Right.
No, that's what? It's like a Chanukiah. No, gotta make sure the candles have to be exactly straight. They can't be off. You have to be the right amount of oil. You have to write exactly the time.
There's a profound other religious component, and this harkens back to our earlier conversation. A great number of Jews didn't like being Jewish; they liked being Hellenistic, and they were. Well, they prospered under the Hellenistic regime, and I presume that afterwards they didn't have much of a market for their ideas. I don't know.
But if you study, there's a professor, Chanuka, I think University of Chicago, did a big study on the revolt, and the accepted opinion in academia is that it wasn't really a fight between Greeks and the Jews. It was a civil war between the Hellenized Jews and the call them the Haredi for the sake of and the ultra-Orthodox Jews at the time, and the Hellenized Jews are calling upon the Greek friends And the Greek government helped them get rid of these old-fashioned, backward people for the sake of the Greek Empire. For the sake of
that didn't work, and so this is why I think of it as a religious holiday. Because the religious guys won.
Yeah, for sure. And we're back because basically because we got the Beis Hamikdash back, and we can bring korbanos again, things like that. We can pray. It makes sense. And the symbol of that is lighting the menorah. Now, if the menorah represents Torah, you never saw the Torah, or the mindset of the Mikdash and closest to God. If there's a symbol of this being a religious holiday, it's definitely lighting the menorah. That's for sure. And everything the menorah represents in the Beit HaMikdash. Remember, the menorah reminds us of teaching Torah. So it does every day. Now, is in any way Hanukkah a universal holiday?
Yes.
Wait. First time before. Why are you saying no?
Because it was like Sukkot is the universal holiday. Hanukkah is not the universal holiday. Hanukkah is the holiday for the Jewish people.
It's art. Agreed?
It gets dark
check
and then it
online.
gets
Anybody
light.
online? Would you all agree that there's nothing universal about Hanukkah? There's no reason why we want to celebrate the same holiday? Now, it just so happens.
I think Steve has a great.
No,
I
I cheated.
Okay, because you know this.
Because I know the source.
Okay. Now, so Steve, what is universal about the holiday? We know very well.
It's what's the?
It's always the same time of year as the happy holiday
As
season.
the happy holiday, right? As Saturnalia.
No, we'll get to Saturday in a minute.
Yeah,
It's called Christmas.
it's getting better all the time. That's a Beatles song. It's getting lighter all the time.
But it can't get worse. Really.
Right.
We'll see in a minute. So everyone thinks, put it this way, logically, there should be no connection between Christmas and Hanukkah. Why? Because why is Hanukkah and Hanukkah? That's when the battle ended. People remember they played with the words Chanuka Chafei.
So now you're going to get into trouble because why is Christmas on Christmas? That's not, you can't answer that
Because
question.
he was born.
No.
I know he wasn't.
They made it.
I know they made it
up.
Yes, but I'm saying, but if you believe their midrash and our midrash, that it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
If you believe that the war ended on the 25th Kislev,
Right.
and that's when they lit the menorah,
Okay.
and if you believe that that he was born on that day, so it's an amazing coincidence that they both come out the same time of year.
Yeah.
But if you look carefully at the sources, you'll see it's not a coincidence at all, because Hanukkah began way before Hanukkah. Yeah, probably. And I'm assuming you're aware of that. I just want to go for that source first. It's on the source sheet, which I think the rabbi shared with you guys.
Yeah.
It's on the back page. What's important to me, though, there's two sources which I'm assuming you're familiar with. I want you to notice how they're talking to each other. There's two sources that have nothing to do with each other, but you can see how similar they are. The two sources, one is going to be in Masechet Avodah Zarah Daf Chet, about Adam HaRishon, about the winter solstice in Adam HaRishon. The second source is a famous source in Masechet Shabbat about Ner Hanukkah, with Mahadrim and Mahadrin and the miracle of Pach Hashem. Now, I'm going to explain first the Gemara in Avodah Zarah, for those who aren't familiar. For some reason, we have a tractate about idol worship, which doesn't make any sense because we don't hold from idol worship. On the other hand, we want to promote our God. We don't want other gods promoted. So there's an interesting mission. The first mission in Avodah Zarah tells you that if you're a Jewish businessman, don't cut a deal with a non-Jewish, with an idol worshiper near their holidays. Why? Because if you cut a deal with an idol worshiper on their holiday or near their holiday, what are they going to do? They're going to thank their God, and you're going to promote other gods because it's Bashert. I got the deal. I closed the deal with our closing exactly on the that guy's birthday or whatever the guy Buddhist birthday or something like that. Now, in order to keep that halacha, what do you need to know? You need to know the idol worship holidays, and that's the next Mishnah. So what's the next Mishnah saying? These are the holidays. That's Tafchet. The Mishnah is these are the holidays, and the first two are one called Kalanda, one called Saturna, or Saturna and Kalanda, right? And then the Gemara explains where these holidays came from. So Kalanda, Rabbi says, are the 8 days after the winter solstice. Kufa here is Kufa Tevet, is the winter solstice. Saturn, 8 days that precede the winter solstice. Got it? In our calendar, that would be the 8 days before December 21st and 8 days after December 21st. Now, Tanur Banan, how does this holiday come about? So I'll make it fun. Adam Arishon got a really nice watch from his father-in-law when he married Chava. A built-in watch. A sense of time. Now, what did he notice? He was, according to our tradition, he was born in Tishrei, at least one opinion, the main opinion. And as time goes on, it comes Cheshvan, comes Kislev. What does he notice? The days are getting shorter and shorter. You finish Shabbos, it's time for Mincha. And he's good at math. And what's he realized? Here, come over here.
Sorry.
He's getting, there's more and more, the days are getting shorter and shorter. He does a quick progression. And what's he realized? If this continues, what's going to happen? Within a couple months, there'll be no light anymore. And just, you know what? When God told me, if I blame my wife for what I did wrong, I'm sorry, if I eat from that tree, I'm going to die. I didn't die. Oh, that must be death. No light. So that's what he says. So what did he do? Well, let's read what he does. So Adam Rishon saw that the day was getting shorter and shorter. He knew Yiddish. He said, oily. He said, well, it's to me. Maybe it's because of my sin. That's why things are getting darker. And going back to Tovavo, remember? Before God said Vahi Or, everything was Tovavo. Says, and that's the death that God said I would have. That was my punishment. What did he do? Amad v'yashav chet yamim b'tanit tefillah. It's Amad v'yashav, excuse me. He sat 8 days in fasting and tefillah. Kivan Shra'ab. Then he looks after 8 days of fasting. He looks at his watch. Stop. And what did he realize? The days stopped getting shorter, and they start getting longer. Yom Shamarich, we saw the day getting longer. Amar, Minagosh Olam, that must be the cyclical nature of our calendar. And he made an 8-day holiday. The next year, he made a holiday on the same 8 days that he fasted to remember that God answered his prayer. And Kavachomer makes a holiday of the 8 days that he celebrated that year. Because the first holiday became Saturna, the second holiday became Kalanda. So it says, Hein Kavam L'Shem Shamayim. So look at the phrase of L'Shana Ha'acheret. The next year, they made both of them Yom Tovim, both 8 days. He made these celebrations to thank God. His kids went up the derech. And what happened? They became idol worship holidays. Understand that? Now, what's similar here? So let's take a look. In Masechet Bavli and in Masechet Shabbat about Ner Hanukkah, the original commandment of the original custom of Hanukkah was every family had a candle in their house during these 8 days. The Mahadran, every person in the house had a candle. And then what was Mahadran and Mahadran? Beit Shammai says we start with 8 candles, counting down to 1. Beit Hillel says we start with 1 candle up to 8. Isn't that the 8 days before the solstice, getting darker and darker, and 8 days after? That can't be a coincidence. And then with the look at the last line of the Gemara. Remember, after the miracle of the Pach Hashemen, the Shana Cheret, the next year, Kavum, and they made him Yomim Tovim. There's a lot of parallels between these two idol worship holidays, the winter solstice holiday and the Gemara Shabbat. Not to mention that don't be surprised that we're going to light candles during the winter solstice at the darkest time of the year. Now, the problem, which I think I did this year before, I'll just review it. On a Jewish calendar, there's no winter solstice. On a solar calendar, December 21st is the winter solstice. That makes a lot of sense. It's easy. But we have a lunar calendar, but not really. Why? Because our calendar is lunar, but the first month has to include the spring equinox. If not, we add a month. That's Shmor Chodesh Aviv, Vasita Pesach, in Chodesh Aviv. Therefore, somewhere in the first month will be the spring equinox, and therefore, 9 months later is going to be the winter solstice. Agreed? Which means it has to fall either in the 9th month or 10th month. There's a range of days, do the math. There's a range probably of up to a month it can fall in, but it's got to be within the month. Now, the shortest day of the year is going to be the longest night, but not the darkest night. Now, if you were paying attention, from August till October, Shabbos was getting 10 minutes earlier every week, right? Now, starting this week, for the next month or two, it's going to be pretty much the same time. Remember from last year?
Mhm.
It's a short, it's the same thing, changes maybe 2-3 minutes. There may be a 10-minute spread over 2 months. Up until now, it's been 10 minutes a week. You can do the math. Why? It has to do with the tilt of the earth, depends where you're on, what latitude you're on. But either way, what I'm getting at is that the longest nights of the year, the whole 9th and 10th month is pretty much the longest nights. But even though there's long nights, some nights have a lot of light. Why? There's another luminary, the moon. And when the moon's out, we have light at night. If I'm looking for the darkest night, not just the longest, but the darkest nights of the year, I need a night when what? When it's long, when there's long night and no moon, Now, if I'm looking just not the longest, but if I want like a week of that, the last week of the month, the moon's getting smaller and smaller, but it only rises at 4 a.m. because it's rising later and later. And the last week of the month, the moon doesn't rise till like 3 a.m, and then 3:30, and then every 45 minutes later every day. By the time you get to Rosh Chodesh, and the first day of the month, it starts. And therefore, the darkest nights of any month is the last week, and the first day or two of the next month. If the winter solstice is in the 9th or 10th, and where's the best place to find the darkest nights of the year? The last week of the night going into the 10th, which by chance is exactly Hanukkah, right? So 24th to 25th to the 2nd. So what in our calendar, Hanukkah just so happens to be the darkest 8 days of the year. And we have a custom of lighting candles, which would make sense even if the Hanukkah miracle never happened, even if the military victory never happened. It might have been even an ancient custom. Don't be surprised that Jews like the people light candles the darkest time of the year. And they midrash with other Mishnah with 8 days up and down. It fits perfectly. So we do have a winter solstice. And we have winter solstice holiday. Now, yeah. Now, if you go back a page, I think you have it on there.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
So then why don't we peg Hanukkah to the solar calendar?
To
The solar calendar, like we do with the Ten Talamata, right? We do have.
Why don't we?
Yeah, why don't we have Hanukkah
Was it?
at the end of December?
The Ten Talamata is a totally different thing. Ten Talamata has to like this. Ten Talamata goes by Jewish calendar because it's a week or two after Sukkot. We start asking for rain. That's when in Israel we ask for rain when we need it, and it goes by our lunar calendar. It's right after Rosh Hashanah. We want. We asked for rain at 7. We waited a week or two to get home from Yom Tov, and then we asked for rain.
Correct, but I'm talking about here, it's based.
No, here, we don't do that here. In Bavel, right, they couldn't do that. Why? Because in Bavel, in Israel, we ask for rain in the beginning of Cheshvan. In Bavel, in Mesopotamia, you can't ask for rain in the beginning of Cheshvan, because the last time it rained on the 17th of Cheshvan, it was pretty ugly. It was a big flood. So no one in Bavel is going to ask for rain in the second month, in the month of Cheshvan. That's a sort of a joke about the flood. But it's not a joke. Why?
But is it true that we know that it started the 17th?
If you read the Bible, yeah.
Oh, it's really, oh, it is.
But that's not what they did it because.
No, that's just good. No, they did it for the same reason, though.
Right.
Because if it rains too much in
Too
Bavel,
much in Bavel
there'd be
is
flooding.
floods. Yeah, you already have water.
There's water there. You want a little. You don't need too much. Too much? What? Too much is not good. Like money. So you have
So where I was going with that was that,
What?
where I was going with that is that so Babel starts 90 days from the Tufa, right?
Yeah.
It's related.
Yeah,
to
it makes
the
sense that because rain is needed for agricultural calendar. It makes sense, right, to ask for rain with the agricultural calendar. So therefore, it's 30 days before the winter solstice, or 6 days after the equinox.
Yeah.
34. But but December 4th is without the Julian calendar, not the Gregorian
Correct.
calendar.
So, but I'm asking
And we
for
didn't fix it yet. What?
If the reason. for
December 4th is
Hanukkah-
like ridiculous.
Sorry, if the reason for Hanukkah as a universal holiday.
I didn't say the reason for Hanukkah. I'm saying that it shouldn't surprise us that our celebration of Hanukkah
Yes.
is in a winter solstice, and the 8 days of Hanukkah is the best winter solstice there is.
Correct.
Because it's the darkest time. Ours is better than December 21st.
But you'll see there are other reasons why Chafei Kislev was chosen, not just because of this reason.
Sure.
This is a nice reason, but there's a
better reason.
There's a better reason.
Or a parallel reason from the other, which we'll see that my more sex is the same reason. Sort of. Okay? I'm just saying our Hanukkah our winter solstice is a better date than December 21st.
Because of the.
Because the dark, because of the moon.
25th.
Because the darkest nights of the month, not just the longest, the darkest. Got it? And the range of these 2 months, it's pretty much the same length, but you go by the darkness. Now, if you look at Christian sources, go back a page to source H, actually source J, the page 3 of the source sheet. So I quote from somewhere on the internet. So I'll just summarize, it's easy. Romans were pagans. And
What?
and they had a holiday called Saturnalia, which is exactly this. That's the holiday that the Gemara is talking about. Because the Gemara is in Roman times. Like Shady was destroyed by the Romans. Romans were around. In Rome, there was a winter solstice holiday called Saturnalia. It was the biggest thing. It was like pouring for 8 days. From December 24th, and during that period, it says Roman roads were closed. Roman law, no one could be punished for causing damages. It was accepted. Like and this guy Lucian writes down that he describes it. People got people got drunk, and they went house singing. Other things like you can read on your own. Like college campus on Thursday nights. I gave a share 2 nights ago, so I was able to bring good examples. Now, what happened when Constantine took over and made the Roman Empire Christian? They couldn't stop Saturnalia. So what did he do? I'm not good at things. So they say, you know what? They said, you can keep Saturnalia, but it's going to be celebration of his birth. And they made up a medrash. He was born on the last day of Saturnalia, which is nice. But it turned a secular holiday into a religious holiday. So therefore, the reason why Christmas, he wasn't born that day, that they celebrate his birth that day because of the winter solstice. In fact, in Boston, in the 1680s or something like that, like the Puritans in Boston, some big reverend there, 1680, I think, for 3 years, Christmas was forbidden by law in Massachusetts because they realized where it came from. But he lost his job, that reverend, because you can't what do you mean you can't celebrate? It's like, so that's it's like I give examples, I get in trouble. Like we also have things that really shouldn't be Jewish, but we do them anyhow because that's what the people do.
Like what? Like a phrase,
Probably like Purim. Not our not all
Of course
Purim,
not.
but getting the guys, yeshiva guys getting drunk and going crazy on Purim isn't so.
I could have figured that one out.
Not to mention
I
Kiddush.
know, yeah.
Not to mention Kiddush stuff on Shabbos. Okay. Now, where are we? Oh,
We're
so,
gonna
what- so therefore, it's not by chance, and that's a universal. If a winter solstice is a universal holiday since it's the time of year, and don't be surprised if we find different cultures celebrate in different ways and making up reasons to celebrate, and giving religious meaning to a natural time of the year. Remember, Pesach is a spring equinox holiday. So this is a fall equinox holiday. Because it's an agricultural time of the year. Now I want to give a better reason why Hanukkah is on Hanukkah, which has the book of Haggai. So I'll give a quick, now I go to the first sources. And this, I know this is the brain share, this is just to review a quick history. Yeah, so it goes like this. The second temple period, go back a little bit. The first temple was destroyed by the Babylonians. for our bad behavior. We go into exile. As Alan said, but people thought, for good reason, that once the temple was destroyed and we're exiled, we lost our sovereignty, our land, our temple, we're in someone else's land, game over. You can maybe still believe in God, but he broke his covenant with us, or we broke our side of it, or maybe there is no God, or whatever it is, or maybe we're like dry bones, if we heard the Cheskel. People in exile had good reasons to give up hope. The prophets, Yirmiyahu and Cheskel, said, it's not game over, it's rehab. And you're going to come back after 7 years, or at least have the opportunity of coming back after 7 years. And sure enough, 7 years after the Babylonians came into power, it was only 50 years since the temple was destroyed, but 7 years after the Babylonians came into power, the Persians defeated them, as Yirmiyahu predicted. And the amazing thing is, the first big Persian came, conquer Cyrus the Great, issues his famous edict called the Cyrus Declaration, it's in the British Museum, allowing all the ethnic groups that were exiled by the Babylonians, they're allowed to go back to their homelands, rebuild their temples, and they had religious autonomy as long as they're good Persian citizens. And it was a win-win, it worked like great. It was a great policy to make people like the Persian Empire, especially compared to the way things were before. Now, the prophets, I guess, or the religious, some of them, the Zionist ones in Babel, saw this as a sign from God. And they saw the Cyrus Declaration as the hand of God, and that's the first line of the book of Ezra. That in the first year of Koresh, when he makes his declaration, it says, He'ir Hashem Ruach Koresh. Now, the source for that is Isaiah chapter 44 and 45 and 48, and basically from 40 to 50. When you read it carefully, but whoever that Navi is, it might be, it's a Nebuah attached to the back of the book of Isaiah. But if you read it, if you have shot, I think, it's a Navi in real time. If you just read it, he's basically saying that Koresh's rise to power, it's not Koresh, it's me, I'm behind the events. He's my Mashiach. And through him, I'm telling you, it's time to come home. He says, to me, Bavel, get out of Bavel, go back to Urs Kasdim. And he says, I'm the one who put him in the power. I'm the one who helped him take over the Babylonians. And he is even who I am. And I'm doing it for the sake of my people. But that's what they call it, Isaiah, and that's supporting the first part of Ezra. Now, the people who came back, those who returned, very few returned, a couple thousand returned, and they're hoping to build a temple. But when they come back, where do they find? There's local population that aren't Jewish, who don't like him so much. And they get into a fight. And the local population starts like called the First Intifada, and they get a building freeze. And for the next 18 years, nothing's happening. And imagine how depressed the people are who return. Because they all came on one-way tickets, and now they're stuck. And all their friends stay back in Babel, smirking. I told you so, you idiots for coming. And the community in Jerusalem is finished, pretty much. Not finished, but they're down and depressed. 18 years later, there's a new administration in Persia. Darius the Great. All these kings have the same last name, don't they? Cyrus the Great. That's a joke. Now, and now with the new emperor, Darius, the prophet Haggai says this is a great opportunity maybe to pick up and start building the temple again. But his opening line is, in Haggai, he's saying that what? It's the second year of Darius, which is 18 years after they came back. He says, the people, Pasuk Bet says, the people are saying, this isn't time to build. Why are they saying that? We're going to see in Haggai, or you can read it, you'll see it, the economy is falling apart. Not only are we under foreign rule, and the local population hates us, and we can't get our temple built, we're going nowhere. Our economy is falling apart. No one can make a living. Our agriculture, it's just a disaster. And the people are interpreting that as God doesn't want us here. If he wanted us here, things would be better. So Haggai says you have it exactly wrong. The reason why things are so bad is because you're not trying hard enough. The people are saying we're not trying at all because God doesn't want us. Now, I got the message. Goes back to David. Why isn't it working? Am I not trying hard enough, or don't you get the message? When you teach an 18-year-old or college kids, they understand. You know what? I'll give a better analogy in a minute to that. Now, what's Haggai say? You have to try harder. And he promises it. You try harder, make more of an effort to build the temple, and you're going to see that your economy will pick up again, your agricultural markets will be skyrocketing, and there'll be a big political upheaval, and you're going to return to sovereignty. Big kings are going to fall, armies are going to fall, and Israel will be great again. He said, I'm just making it's all inside. That's Haggai, 2 chapters of Haggai. His first opening nevuah in Rosh Chodesh Elul, beginning of the 6th month, this is his first one. He has another one on the next page, in the month of the last day of Sukkot that year. That's the Eid. Israel will be great again. He gives them Chizuk and Pasuk Dalet. Source C if you have the source sheet. Chazak Zerubbabel, Chazak Yeshua ben Yetzadok. Remember Zerubbabel, the political leader? We sing about him. Remember Kate Zerubbabel? And the people, and they all get Chizuk. Chazak. Why? Because I'm with you. And then he promises, this house can be greater than the first one. Right now, it's nothing. But if you put in effort, there's potential where the second temple can be greater than the first temple. But you have to make an effort. That was Sukkot's time. And sure enough, they take care of the politics and they get the building trees lifted and they can break ground on the temple. So in year 2 of Daryavesh, on the 24th of Kislev, which is our first night of Hanukkah, isn't it? Because we light the candles on the 24th going to the 25th. He gives a nevuah, and he tells the people, pay attention to your ways. From this day, in Pasuk Tevav, Miterem Sum Even Alavim Beichal Hashem. This is the day before we start building the second temple. And then he tells them again, Pasuk Chet, pay attention to this day, from the 24th of Kislev, from the day in which we laid the foundations of God's temple, Beichal Hashem, pay attention. Right now, our economy, at the end of the last year, our GMP this year was a disaster. By next year, you'll see the economy is going to skyrocket. And then on the same day, Pasach he gives another nevuah. On the very same day, the very same groundbreaking ceremony. What does he say? There's going to be a big political upheaval. See Pasach Bet, Vafati Kisei Mamachot, Bishmati Chosek Mamachot Goim. Vafati Mechabal Rochem. There'll be an upheaval, and when it's over, I'll make you, Zerubbabel, you'll be signing documents. He's alluding to sovereignty. Now, you can't publicly announce we're going to become sovereign again, because it's like you can't give a drasha in shul that the government's going to fall. So you have to allude to it. But it's no doubt that's what he's alluding to. That things can be great again. Because in fact, everything will be great again. If what? If you make an effort to rebuild the temple. Not just rebuild the temple, but build a religious society again to keep God's mitzvot properly. Now, the question is, it's going to take 4 years to build the temple. If you know Israel, it's no time to start a building project in the middle of the winter. Back then, for global warming, it rained the normal ways before then. Now, just one last proof. We go back to source B. The Haftarah for Hanukkah. Remember, it's the same year 2 of Daryavesh. And if the Navi says, be happy, what's that imply? The people are down and depressed, and they have every reason to be. He tells them, don't be that. Why? Because I'm with you, and I'll bring my Shekhinah back. I want to bring it back. And nations will look up to you again. Remember, if and you be my people, I'll be your God. Chanuka says the same thing, but he puts more of an accent on how you have to keep God's mitzvot, and take care of the poor and the needy, and build a just society. So the question I want to understand is, why did Haggai pick the 24th of Kislev for the groundbreaking ceremony? Now, let's say you want to build a shul. Do you start breaking ground when you have enough money to finish the project? Or do you make a groundbreaking when you have enough money to make a groundbreaking project? Because once you have a groundbreaking, then you can start getting the big rollers, the big donors, because there's something snapping, something's moving. So in a similar way, he wants the people to get more motivated, and therefore we're going to have a groundbreaking ceremony with 2 fiery speeches about what? Get to work on this temple, come and help out, everyone join in, and you're going to see things will be better again. Your political situation will improve, and your economic situation will improve. That's Haggai in a nutshell. Why pick this time of year? As you said before, it can only get better. Why? In their national situation, they've reached rock bottom. And what we're doing is we're taking a phenomena of nature, winter solstice, and using it as a symbolic time of year of saying, don't give up hope in times of darkness. Because they're in times of darkness, and this is going to be a sign of hope. Like do something on, whenever you make something, you always pick important days to mark important events, right? You know, if someone's your set, maybe something, you take a special time of year, like you're gonna, I don't know if it happened, but let's say after 9/11, you want to break ground on the next, on the new tower kind of thing. So you do it probably on the anniversary or on something, you try to you pick a date that's meaningful to get support of what you're doing. And therefore, I'm claiming is they're picking the winter solstice time of year to break ground on the temple. Now, these nebuot of Haggai are never fulfilled in that time period because we don't reach sovereignty. There's a big war, a big fall, and the economy doesn't get so great. A little bit. The Kuzari talks about. The lady talks about the Kuzari. The nebuot was a potential. What could have been, but it had to be a two-way street. It was on a low fire low time. It wasn't a total disaster, but definitely was far from what he was hoping for. When were these nebuot fulfilled? The first time we returned to sovereignty and prosperity was the Hasmonean revolt. The Hasmonean, the Hashmonean, the Maccabees, when they won. We returned to sovereignty, and boy, they returned to prosperity for a couple of decades and doing great. And therefore, when Yehuda Maccabee, when they win the war and they take over Jerusalem, if you look in Megillat Tani, in the month of Cheshvan, there are holidays describing when we came into the temple and cleaned up all the places of idol worship already. And we got rid of the Greeks here and there, and all these different battles. And we see from our sources that the battles, we defeated the Greeks more than a month before Hanukkah. And when you read Sefer Maccabim, which is on the next page, without reading everything, they tell the story of what happened. And when they defeated the Greeks and kicked them out of the temple, they found everything desecrated, especially the Mizbeyach, the altar, was desecrated because they brought sacrifices to Zeus on it, to their gods on it, and therefore we can't use it. But we couldn't destroy it because and therefore they had to put it into Geniza until a Navi came to say what to do. That's going to be in here. In 44. And when they consulted what to do with the altar of the burnt offerings, which is profane, and they what do you call it? Because they wanted to take it down because it was defiled by the heathens. On the other hand, you couldn't destroy it because it was God's. So they put the stones in what do you call it? They put it to Geniza in a convenient place, it says there, until a prophet would come and tell them what to do, because the hoping prophecy is going to return soon. Now, then they took new stones and they built a whole new altar. And they built a whole new sanctuary, and they built a whole new, all the new vessels. They made a menorah, a shulchan. They made everything new, right? You don't do that in 2-3 hours. It takes a month or two, right?
Especially with supply chain.
Yeah. And then on verse 52, on the 25th day of the month of Kislev, got it? They got up in the morning and they made Chanukkah Kabbalah, got it? So they dedicated the temple on the 25th of Kislev. Now, it just so happens, remember about the Civil War? 3 years earlier, that was the day it was defiled. Now, why did the Hellenists, the Jewish Hellenists, why did they dafka in their face? Why did they defile the temple on that day? My claim is, ever since Haggai, the date of that groundbreaking ceremony was a date of hope, that maybe things will get better. Picking specifically the day they broke ground on the second temple with all the speeches of hope, desecrating exactly on that day, that's Lahachis, got it? And therefore, it says here, Yehuda, the Maccabees, or Yehuda and his army, purposely waited to that day to dedicate it. Pumfaket, exactly the opposite. We see that day was special, before Hanukkah, that day was special. We see in Haggai, we see in the book of Maccabees. And even if the miracle of the Menorah didn't happen, there'd be reason to have a celebration of Chanukkah Mizbeyach. It says there, what's it say there? More of verse 59, it says, I love the burnt offerings. The same day was the same. But here, 56. And so they kept the dedication of the altars, Chanukkah Mizbeyach, for 8 days, bringing sacrifices and singing psalms. And then the next year, they made it a set holiday for prosperity. Notice in the book of Maccabees, which is a firm book, when you read it, whoever wrote it is as firm as to be. But there's no mention of a Hanukkah menorah miracle, for a good reason, because not too many people knew about that miracle.
Inside.
Why? Because the way it's usually taught is, if you don't read the Gemara carefully, it sounds like they came in, they found a thing of oil, they lit the menorah, and the menorah remained lit for 8 days. If that happened, they did not fulfill the commandment to light the menorah. Because if you read Chumash, you light the menorah me'erev ad boker. And in the daily routine, the Kohen lights the menorah in the evening. In the morning, he comes in. Even if it's burning, you extinguish it. You clean out all the wicks, clean out thing. You put new oil in, put new wicks in. You set it up, and it stays unlit all day long. You come in the evening, and then you light it.
Rani V'Simcha is the Haftarah for Bahalot also.
For sure, because of the menorah, people think it's because of the Chanukkah. But no, it's because of it's the time period. We'll see in a minute the big line that's going to explain everything. Now, go back to the Gemara on the back page. So we skip. And listen that the miracle was not in the menorah. The miracle was in the pot.
Yeah.
It's simple. What happened? You said they quote when it says my Hanukkah in the middle of the Gemara there. About Hanukkah, and they quote Megillat Tani. That on the 25th of Kislev, for 8 days you don't do a spadium and you don't do fast. This is the Greeks came into the Echal. All this money, nothing had an OU on it. But that's, and they found one little container that had a hashgacha. Okay, so see, but kubla matzu ela pach echad shel shemen. Now it's pach zakaron v'keva. The plural pach is pachim. Menorah is nekeva, right? Menorah. Okay. Shaya munach b'chatom b'shuvim gelo. Okay. Lo yad bo means in the pach. Ela like yom achad. There was not oil there. It's like one day. Naseh bo nes. Bo means in the pach. Therefore, it's nes pach hashemen. V'idliko mimeno shmone yamin. Every day, the same container. Now, is that a new miracle or an old one? Alicia had the same miracle. For who? For a lady down in the press. She lost her husband. Her kids were sold into servitude. She couldn't pay off her debts. And she complained to the chief rabbi. And he came, what do you have in the house? I got a little thing of oil. He says, ask, never borrow the things, fill them up, paid off her debts. But again, someone down in the press. And that Pach Hashem was a sign of hope. Now, how many people would know about this miracle? So let's take the New York Times. Let's say it was around then. And let's say the Jews were reading it. The word boycotted. What would be the front page article during this week, during the Hasmonean victory?
Cleaning the temple.
No, it would be the military victory, right?
Oh.
Or taking over the Temple Mount.
Oh, but that happened.
I'm saying, but during this time period, the front page, on the Sunday Times religion section, there'll be a feature article, rumors of a miracle in the temple. Yeah, that when they dedicated, how many people know about the miracle? Well, there's the Kohen who lights the menorah every day, or maybe another one, and the little kid who came at night and filling it up. Well, no one was watching. Sort of a joke.
Got it.
I mean, it's not a miracle that everyone sees or anyone sees, because the miracle is not in the menorah. And by halacha, you can use, if you don't have good tahara, you can use tamei oil. Tumas, when you don't have tahara, you bring tamei. You have to light the menorah. It wasn't, and therefore, it wasn't a miracle that was needed. It wasn't a miracle that anyone saw. But a couple knew about it. So the rabbis see that not as a reason, but as a sign, but an oath. It's a sign from God that what? There's something special about this victory. God's giving them a sign that there's something special about that victory. And that sign was enough, not just to celebrate it that year, but to continue celebrating it forever, or at least for the next couple of years. That's why it's called what's called a siba. And it's not the siba, it's a siman. The miracle of the menorah is not the reason for the holiday. The reason for the holiday is the national military victory. The sign from God that God was behind those events was the miracle of the menorah, which gives enough reason for the rabbis at that time to make it a regular holiday. Now, I want to go back to the Haftarah for Hanukkah. I'll just quote one line, which is source F, in Zechariah, which is the last line of Haftarah. Zechariah has a vision of a menorah with And the menorah has two olive branches on top of it, pouring oil into it, which explains later on is Yeshua and the leaders Yeshua and Zerubbabel. And but he doesn't understand the meaning of it. What's he say? And last time he says, what are you seeing? He says, here's what I see. He doesn't know what it means. This is God's message to the future potential political leader who's hoping to become king. It's not only about chayil means here, economic prosperity. Koach means military power. Meaning, this is probably one of the biggest messages in Chumash, is that if God's going to bless us with sovereignty, with a land, with sovereignty, and with prosperity, that's not the goal. We don't pray to become rich. We don't pray to win battles and have a land. In order to serve as God's people, in order to be God's nation, you have to have. You need to be a nation. You need to be a nation that's respected, that's established. And therefore, they're vehicles, they're tools, not the goal. Remember the Haftarah from Yirmiyahu Perek Tet, we read on Tisha B'Av. The rich man should not boast in his wealth. The strong guy, how strong he is, and the smart guy, how smart he is. It's good to be smart, and it's good to be wealthy. It's good to, what was the third one? To be rich and strong. But use those as tools to sanctify God, to know God. I'm God doing chesed, mishpat, and tzedakah in the land, because that's what God wants us to do with those vehicles. In order to build a just society, you need wealth to do mitzvot. So the goal is not having the wealth. The goal is being God's people. In order to be God's people in a way that can sanctify God, as a nation, we're praying for wealth so that we can serve God properly. Now, one of the big mistakes the Hashmonaim made was they took the political power. They became corrupt. Things got really bad after a couple of decades. And that's why the rabbis weren't so happy with the Hashmonaim. And then we're talking about Hanukkah. There's no Masechet Hanukkah. There's just the people who couldn't stop the celebration. Very similar to, but there's a difference between those Saturday, you're getting intoxicated. It's the darkest time of year, you get drunk. Basically, Saturday is more like New Year's nowadays. Where people get drunk, just have a party. Lighting candles is a much more profound statement. We're taking the darkest time of the year and giving a religious message about hopes for a better future. Now, therefore, the sign of the miracle of the menorah is a reminder not only that this victory is from God, but it reminds us of the Nebuah of Isaiah of Lo b'chai v'lo b'koach kibruchi. Because if you're going to return to sovereignty and prosperity, what are you going to do with it? You're not praying. That's not the goal. That is simply those are tools. And if you don't use those tools properly, God will take them away from you. Now, it's interesting. Josephus was living about almost 200 years later. He was in time of the Hanukkah story is 167 BC and 70 AD CE is the Churban, and that's when Josephus he was, and he becomes the historian after the Churban, after the temple was destroyed. So he writes the history of the Jews. He quotes a lot from the book of Maccabees. He tells the story there in Source Age, and then towards the end, he explains that they celebrate for 8 days, and then the last 5 lines. He says, and from that time to this, we celebrate this festival and call it lights. What do we see? By the time of the Churban, there's already a custom of lighting candles. Sefer HaMalachim doesn't talk about it, but 200 years later, it's already a custom, maybe an ancient custom. But he doesn't know why. But he's Jewish, he's got to give a svara. I suppose the reason was because this liberty beyond our hopes appeared to us. And it was given the name to that hospital. What's he saying basically? That lighting candles is a sign of hope. Now, especially after the Churban, and boy did Josephus saw the Churban. He was one of the generals beforehand. And all those men committed suicide, if you know the stories. But the fact, let me just get the time's up. Oh my gosh, I knew how late it was. Here's the bottom line. I wanted to divide Hanukkah and later this into 3 time periods. Hanukkah before Hanukkah, before the military victory. Hanukkah after the military victory. There has been a time period of great wealth and prosperity and sovereignty in the land. And Hanukkah after the temple was destroyed. The reason for Hanukkah before Hanukkah is a universal holiday from the time of Adam, because that's part of nature. And don't be surprised if people light candles. Rabbi Menachem has an article about it. It was also the end of the olive harvest.
Right.
And you celebrate by
So,
lighting
yeah.
thing, which there's a lot of people about it. There's an article by Rabbi Menachem. It's not the same article as this, but it's the same. It blends with this idea. Then there's from Chagai, using this time of year as the impetus to get working on things. And now that they takes on even special studies specifically for the second temple period. But again, it's a time of hope. Then after the victory, when they purposely picked this time of year to dedicate the temple, it becomes our national celebration. It goes from something universal to something national, with a sign from God of something spiritual. And then every other national holiday is nullified after the Qurban, except for Hanukkah. Important. Why do we keep Hanukkah? Because after the temple is destroyed, Hanukkah returns to Hanukkah before Hanukkah. It's a holiday of hope. And religion, not just to remember to be religious, but rather to remember what to do. Don't give up hope of returning one day to sovereignty and being God's people, but to remembering what to do with that sovereignty the next time you get it. And basically remembering Zechariah, the lighting the candles and reading Haftarah for Shabbos Hanukkah reminds us of Lo B'chai V'lo B'koach. So if you're going to pray for sovereignty and return to sovereignty, that all these new to be fulfilled one time again, what do we do with it once we get it? And therefore, once a year we're going to have this national holiday. We're going to remember there were one stage we had sovereignty, but we have to remember that should we be worthy of returning to that, what are we going to do with it? And therefore, it takes on now its religious message of represented by the menorah, without going to what the menorah represents.
So then the purpose of the brachot is really sha'asa nisim. We are supposed to remember nisim, and I'd like to know which ones we're supposed to remember, okay? But why we do that is because we're commanded to light the candles, because through the lighting of the candles, we should be thinking about, that should be what our kavanah is.
It's also, and for Bisman Hazeh, Bisman Hazeh really means at this time of year.
But it's interesting, nisim, because all the time we thought there was one nis, and that nis was the pach shemen, and now, but the bracha doesn't say she'asa nes, it says nisim.
Yeah, that's ala nisim. Ala nisim, that's valid growth. The ala nisim doesn't mention this pach shemen; it only mentions the military victory.
So
Now,
that's the nes.
Yeah, but it's really cool. If you were living then, you wouldn't say it's a miracle. It was our army did it.
Yeah.
Now, how do you see miracles? What are miracles? A miracle happens every day. We call nature. You don't see God, you perceive God. And you perceive God through, that's I think Nispach Hashemen is so meaningful in that sense, because it's a miracle you perceive, you don't see. Because the oil and the shemen, it wasn't a glass bottle. It was back then it was a pottery. You don't see the miracle. It's called, it's hidden from the eye. It's a hidden miracle. And miracles like that can only be perceived, you don't see them. But one of the main educational points that Chumash making all the time is like when we eat bread, we say, Amotzi lechem min haaretz. No, we did it ourselves, but God made the system. To look at nature and look at life and look at history and see God behind the events, you need a certain perception, you need a certain type of light. And I think that's what the menorah, that the light of like when you see the aura there, when you see the light enables you to see God. It goes back to day one, because the day one of creation is not art, it's not physical light, it's not electromagnetic radiation, it's the ability to perceive God through his creation. Remember, that's organs at the level, because the sun and the moon is day 4. But creation begins with light, meaning the ability to perceive God. Now, to perceive God through nature, you need a bit of education. That's part of Torah education, Torah study. But you need to be trained to be able to see God. And then what to do with that understanding afterwards. And that's why, for so many reasons, that's why the miracle of Pach HaShemen is so meaningful to celebrate the holiday by after lighting candles. Now, the cynics among us will say, they made up the story. No, it's a better. Let's say that's true, that would make laying the menorah even more important. Got it? Because if the rabbis make up the story to give meaning to Hanukkah, then that makes laying the menorah even more important. Because we're not laying the menorah to remember the miracle that God did. We're laying the menorah to remember the message of what they made up, of how the rabbis view the holiday, what to do with their prosperity, what to do with their sovereignty. And therefore, the historicity of the miracle is irrelevant to the celebration. And my claim is, if it's a made-up story, that makes it even more important to celebrate. Because we're not celebrating the fact that we didn't need to use tummy or we had Torah for those 8 days. We're celebrating, we're remembering what we need to do with our sovereignty once we get it. So let's say it was let's say you're living a time period where Israel returns to its sovereignty and we have prosperity. Then there'd be really good messages for modern day Israeli society if such a thing would happen. But maybe one day we'll.
The menorah successive.
Yeah, which is amazing, isn't it? The symbol of the state of Israel is exactly the menorah from Menorah.
Yeah.
It's built after that. So now we go back to our title. Is Hanukkah a universal holiday?
Yes, yeah,
It's a national holiday?
yes.
And a religious holiday.
Shkolah.
Okay, so that's the.
It's a trifecta.
What?
It's a trifecta.
Yes. Now, then going back to Mizbeyach with David, if we're going to rebuild it, you have to be unified. You follow? Yosef and Yehuda have to be able to work together, and you have to recognize what they did wrong, and they have to the call of prayer. Now, tefillah, you were asking me about tefillah. You pray. Prayer has to be something transformative. You don't pray to God for rain. You pray to God to remember that God's in charge of rain, but He gives you rain based on your deeds. Now, watch how prayer works. Biblical, like that's a revolution in Chumash about religion. Classic religion, pagan religion. There's gods, there's superpowers up there in charge of different things, and you want them on your side, so you have to placate them. You feed them animals, you sing them praises and stuff like that, with the hope that if you sing praise and give an animal to the rain god, you'll get rain. To fertility god, you'll get growth and things like that. That's Asherah and Baal and things like that. Now, there's the sun god Ra. There's all these gods you can pray to. Along comes Chumash and saying there's one God who's in charge of everything. That's not enough. It's not just knowing there's one God and you have to pray to Him. You pray to Him to remember that one God who's in charge of everything takes care of you, or us as a group, based on our deeds, based on our society. Now, that understanding, if it's internalized, leads to better behavior. And therefore, your prayer reminds you of your relationship with God, and you pray to remember that God can get involved in nature, but it's not a function only of your prayer, it's a function of your deeds. You need to pray to remember that. There's 2 stages in prayer. Because what the prophets say, what Yirmiyahu complains about, when people come to the temple just to pray for rain, but are rotten at home, they say, that's not, you're worshiping Baal. You turn your God into a Baal god. You call yourself Jewish and you're really pagan. Because you're treating your God like a pagan God.
Superstition rather than a religion.
Yeah. Or a way of life. I joke around because people turn Judaism into a religion. It's a way of life. It's a whole, and it's a religion of a nation, of a people. And it's not just what you get, because it's all these things of nature are collective. And therefore it's not, you have to be good so you get rain. We have to be good so we get rain. Now, if you're a good person, but your society is bad, then you have to get involved in society to make it better. Like if let's say recycling would save global warming, and if you don't, it get flooded. So let's say 20% people recycle. When the flood comes, it's going to hit everybody, not just the 80% who didn't recycle. So therefore, it's not enough for you to recycle. We have to promote the idea, explain the idea, and get involved in society to make it happen. If you really believe that. I'm not taking sides on that argument, but I'm giving an example of now the fact that God judges us as a group. That understanding leads to, if it's internalized, leads to leadership and caring about society. That doesn't mean that you kill someone who's Mahal Shabbos, because he's going to move it. But it means you have to, like you were saying, you have to do. And the best way someone to do kirub is not expect them what to do, but you doing what you do better. So people look up to, so people No, that's already, that's behavioral psychology already, or something else. Okay, we got off track already. And we thanks everybody. If there's any questions on the Zoom, I'm more than happy to answer. I know I went overtime, a lot overtime. But you're still there, some of you. So it's good. Okay, okay, I don't think people can talk there. I can't hear anything, so it's okay.
Chat.
The people with cameras on didn't fall asleep, so that's okay.
Yeah, is there anything in the chat?
Oh, chat. I can see the chat here. Hit the button. Chat. I'm not used to an iPad. Yeah. But no. Okay.
Here's something.
More. So this is background noise. There's no chat. Chat for. Here we go. Chat. Oh, this upload sources is okay. That's fine. Alrighty. Oh, did we have to upload the source sheet again for those who came late? I thought we'd share my screen, but all right. Anyway, have a good night, people on Zoom. I hope I think he's recording it. Yeah, so we can talk.
Yeah, he's recording it, and also
Okay,
he'll have, he can put a link on.
So you can put a link and send it for the thing.
Rabbi Leibtag,
Yeah, sure. I hear you.
did you say something about what the Menorah is going to say to the Mizbeyach?
What's
Was
the
that,
Menorah say to Mizbeyach? Oh, yeah.
Did you-
That was the title. But that was the title?
That was.
yeah,
second-
it was, okay, what did you mean?
Okay, so the Mizbeyach, okay, I'll play the title now. Okay, you made me come up with the second line. The Mizbeyach is the book of Maccabees, right? Which is Hanukkah Mizbeyach for the middle. That's the Mizbeyach, Hanukkah Mizbeyach is reflecting the book of Maccabees story, which doesn't mention Pach Hashem at all. But it's celebrating with a big kiddush because of Yom HaTov, because we have our victory. Okay.
I see.
The menorah is Karya, not the money. So when the Mizbech makes the celebration, Menorah tells him it's not only about Chayos, and in Koach, it's also about Ruach. And that's the message of the menorah. That's what I was getting at. Thank you. That's it. That was my point. That was the key part of the title. That wasn't the topic, that was the title. So that's the menorah we tell the Mizbech. Okay? Thanks for asking. I would have forgotten. It's Steve's fault. I learned that from Mother Rishon. Something goes wrong, you blame somebody else. We got him out of Gan Eden. Okay, everyone have a good night.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Good night.